All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring STON.Phi, which is a decentralized exchange,
Right.
or 𝗬𝗢𝗢𝗍 for short. It's built on the 𝗬𝗠 blockchain.
Cool.
So think of it kind of like, a digital marketplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you can trade tokens directly with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that cuts out the need for a middleman.
Hmm.
Like a traditional bank or exchange.
Yeah, that's a big part of the appeal of DeFi in general, right? That decentralization aspect gives users more control over their assets and makes everything much more transparent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, one of the key concepts on any DX is this idea of liquidity providing.
Yeah.
It's basically how these platforms make sure there are enough tokens available for everyone to trade smoothly.
Right.
But I got to admit, this whole impermanent loss thing kind of makes me a bit hesitant to jump in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Impermanent loss is definitely something that anyone who is interested in providing liquidity should understand.
Right.
So, to put it simply, it basically happens when the value of your tokens changes after you've deposited them into a liquidity pool.
Yeah.
And that can lead to you ending up with fewer tokens than you initially put in.
So it's kind of like a gamble then.
Well, yeah, there's always an element of risk in any investment, especially in the DeFi space, right? But platforms like STON.Phi, they're introducing features to try to help mitigate those risks.
Okay.
One example is their new impermanent loss protection program.
Interesting.
It aims to offset some of those potential losses for liquidity providers who are using the STON USDT pool specifically.
Okay, so that sounds promising, especially for someone like me who's pretty new to this whole liquidity providing thing.
Yeah.
But how does it actually work in practice?
So basically, the program is designed to automatically offset up to 5.72% of your potential losses.
Okay.
There are some limits in place, though, so it's not a complete safety net, but it's a step towards making liquidity providing less daunting.
Right, so there are some caps in place.
Right, exactly. There's a monthly limit of $10,000 for the whole program, and each person can only receive up to $100 in offset.
Got it. So it's not like, a foolproof guarantee or anything.
Right, exactly.
But it seems like a step in the right direction for sure.
It is, and it's actually a limited time program, too.
Okay.
It's running from December 12th to December 31st UTC time.
Interesting.
Which kind of makes me think that maybe they're using this as a way to, test the waters a bit and see how users respond,
Yeah, totally. It'll be interesting to see, how this program influences participation and whether other platforms start to adopt similar models, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It does make you wonder about how effective these types of incentives are in the long run, right? Do they actually address the underlying risks, or do they just kind of create this temporary sense of security?
Right. That's a really good point. I'm also curious about why they chose the STON to USDT pair specifically for this program.
Yeah, me too. It seems like a pretty strategic choice.
Yeah. Well, USDT is a stablecoin, meaning it's pegged to the value of the US dollar. So pairing it with STON, which is the platform's native token, might be a way to encourage its use and potentially stabilize its price a little bit. Everything's kind of connected in this space.
Yeah, this is already getting pretty complex, and we've only just scratched the surface. So besides providing liquidity, the source material also mentioned other ways to engage on STON.Phi, like farming and staking.
Oh, yeah.
Can you break those down for us?
Sure. So think of these as different ways to try and grow your crypto holdings.
Okay.
With liquidity providing, you're essentially acting as a market maker. You're facilitating trades, and you earn fees for doing that.
Got it.
Farming is more about taking your LP tokens, which represent your share of a liquidity pool, and using them to farm additional rewards.
Okay, so it's kind of like planting seeds and harvesting the yield, right? Like an analogy. And what about staking?
Staking is where you lock up your STON tokens for a set period of time. And in exchange, you earn unique benefits. Those benefits can include things like 𝗟𝗢𝗦𝗦. Yeah, it's a special NFT that lets you participate in the STON.Phi DAO.
Hold on, DAO NFT. You're kind of losing me here.
Oh, sorry. Let me try and explain those in simpler terms.
Yeah.
Think of an NFT as a unique digital asset, like a one-of-a-kind collectible, but in the digital world.
Yeah.
And a DAO, which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, is basically a community-governed entity.
Okay.
So in this case, holding 𝗟𝗢𝗦 gives you voting rights within the STON.Phi platform.
So you have a say in the future direction of the platform.
Exactly.
Interesting. But with all these different tokens and ways to engage, how do you even know which ones are worth your time and energy? And how do you assess the risk associated with each token?
Well, that's where STON.5's trust score comes in.
Okay.
It's designed to help you navigate all that complexity. Think of it as like a quick risk assessment tool. It gives you insights into the token's trading volume, its price stability, and even its minting possibility.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about how those things, like how those translate into a trustworthy token?
Well, a high trading volume usually suggests there's a lot of activity and liquidity around a particular token, right?
Hmm.
That's often seen as a good sign because it indicates there's established interest and potentially less risk compared to a token with very low trading volume.
So it's like checking the pulse of a token, right? A
Hmm.
strong pulse means it's healthy and active.
Yeah, exactly. The trust score also looks at how much a token's price changes over time.
Right.
Stable prices are generally seen as like a positive thing, while wild price swings might raise some red flags, especially for investors who don't want to take on a lot of risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. If the price was going up and down like a roller coaster, I'd be nervous too.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about this minting possibility you mentioned? I'm still a little fuzzy on what that means.
Sure. So basically, it comes down to how new tokens are created. Some tokens, they have what's called a fixed supply, meaning there's a limited number of them that will ever exist.
Oh.
Others, though, can be minted or created over time, and that can potentially dilute the value of the tokens that are already out there.
So it's like checking the scarcity of a resource, right? Like a limited supply often means higher value.
Exactly. And the trust score takes all these things into account: the trading volume, price stability, and minting possibility. It gives each factor a different weight depending on its impact on risk, and then it combines them into a single score that's easy to understand. So it's a good tool for that initial risk assessment.
It sounds pretty comprehensive,
Yeah.
but doesn't that kind of go against the whole do your own research thing? Like, are we supposed to just trust the algorithm?
That's a great question, and it leads to a really important conversation about the role of these algorithms and our own judgment when it comes to DeFi. The trust score can be a valuable tool, but it shouldn't be the only thing you rely on.
Right. It's a starting point, not the definitive answer.
Exactly.
So what does all this mean for someone who's brand new to DeFi and maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information?
Well, I think it means that there are more resources than ever to help you navigate this space.
Mm-hmm.
Platforms like STON.5 are making DeFi more accessible, but it's still really important to approach it with an informed and critical mindset.
Exactly. That's what we're here for, to try and break down these complex concepts and help make sense of it all.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into 𝗟𝗢𝗦𝗦, from the basics of liquidity providing to these really interesting features like that trust score.
Yeah.
But before we jump into, the implications of all this and what it means for the future of DeFi, let's take a quick break and let all this information sink in a bit. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive on STON.5.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but it's really fascinating to see how 𝗟𝗢𝗦𝗦 is approaching some of the big challenges, I guess, in the DeFi space.
Yeah.
Like how do you make all this stuff less intimidating for new people,
Right.
but also keep it like sophisticated enough, right, for the more experienced users.
Yeah, absolutely. That balance is really important if DeFi is going to keep growing, right? Got to make it easier to get started, but without sacrificing the things that make it powerful.
Totally. Speaking of making it easier, let's go back to that impermanent loss protection program we talked about earlier.
Okay.
We kind of touched on the basics, but I'd love to hear a bit more about the real world impact this could have.
Well, it's certainly a big deal, right? By offsetting some of those potential losses, STON.FI is essentially reducing the risk for liquidity providers.
Right.
And that could bring in a lot more users to that Stone USDT pool,
Makes sense.
which then leads to more liquidity, more trading volume.
Right. It's all connected.
Right.
But could it backfire? Like, could it make people think it's safer than it really is?
That's a really good question. I think it underscores how important it is for STON.FI to be really clear about what this program does and doesn't do.
Right. Got to be transparent.
Exactly. People still need to understand that this is DeFi and there are always risks.
Absolutely. Don't just rely on this one thing to keep you safe, right? Always got to do your own research.
Exactly.
Stepping back a bit, I'm curious, how does this program stack up against other ways people are trying to deal with impermanent loss?
Yeah.
Are other platforms trying similar things?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there are a bunch of different approaches out there. Some platforms offer things that are more like insurance,
Okay.
while others are messing around with fancy algorithms trying to tweak the system to minimize the loss in the first place.
So it's still early days, really, right? We're still figuring out what works best.
Exactly. It's a constantly evolving space, which is exciting, but can also be a bit overwhelming for some people, for sure.
That brings us back to that trust score we were talking about.
Right.
Can we dive into how that works in the real world? Like, say I'm looking at two different tokens. How would I use the trust score to help me decide which one to go with?
Okay, so let's say you're looking at token A and token B.
Right.
You go on STON.𝗦𝗢𝗢, and you see token A has a trust score of 85, while token B is only at 60.
Okay.
Right away, that tells you that STON.𝗦𝗢𝗢 thinks token A is less risky.
Got it.
But that's just the starting point, right? You can then click in and see what's driving those scores.
So it's like a quick snapshot before you really dig into the details.
Exactly. So you might see that token A's high scores because it has a ton of trading volume, which means there's a lot of activity and interest.
Mm-hmm.
And the price has been pretty stable, which also helps.
Right. Makes sense.
Token B, on the other hand, might have a low score because very few people are trading it, and the price is all over the place.
Oh, okay. So even if both tokens sound cool at first,
Right.
the trust score can highlight some important differences.
Yeah, it encourages you to think beyond the surface level.
Right. Look under the hood, so to speak.
Exactly.
You mentioned that the trust score also considers minting possibility.
Yes.
Can you unpack that a bit more? How is that assessed and why should I care?
Of course. So the minting thing, it basically looks at whether more of that token can be created in the future.
Okay.
And if so, how easily can that happen?
Got it.
A token with a fixed supply, where no more can ever be made, is generally considered less risky in terms of, your tokens losing value because there are suddenly way more of them out there.
Right. Supply and demand, right?
Exactly. But if a token can just be minted whenever, that could lead to inflation.
Makes sense.
So the trust score takes all that into account, crunches the numbers, and spits out a single score. Pretty handy, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of information to digest, but it's cool to have access to that kind of insight.
I agree. It does feel like DeFi is getting more transparent and user-friendly, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
But, like we've been saying, even with tools like this, you can't skip doing your own research.
Oh, absolutely. No algorithm can replace critical thinking and really understanding the risks involved.
Well said. So we've explored how STON.𝗦𝗢𝗢 works, from the nuts and bolts of liquidity providing to this really innovative trust score.
Yeah.
But now I think it's time to zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture. What does all this mean for DeFi as a whole, right?
Right.
How could features like this change how we approach research and decision-making in this space?
That's a great question and a perfect way to transition to the final part of our deep dive.
Let's do it. Welcome back, everyone, to the final stretch of our deep dive into STON.𝗦.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From liquidity pools to trust scores, we've covered a lot.
We have, but now I'm kind of thinking about the big picture, right? What does all this innovation mean for the future of DeFi?
It's exciting to consider, isn't it? Platforms like STON.𝗦 are really pushing the boundaries, making these complex concepts more digestible for everyday users.
Right. But there's this tension, I think, between making things easier and still encouraging personal responsibility.
Truly. I mean, tools like the trust score are incredibly helpful, right? But they also raise this question, are we becoming too reliant on algorithms in a space that's supposed to be all about individual empowerment?
Exactly. It's DeFi is all about giving people more control over their money. But if we just end up swapping out, traditional financial institutions for these super sophisticated algorithms, what's the point?
Right. It's not just about shifting power, it's about making sure that individuals are equipped to actually use that power wisely.
So does making things super easy, like with that trust score, does that risk making people, kind of lazy about doing their own research?
That's the challenge, for sure. It's a delicate balance. We want to make DeFi accessible, but we can't lose sight of those core principles, right?
Sure.
Transparency, individual agency, informed decision-making. Those are crucial.
It's like we're exploring this brand new world, right? And we have all these amazing tools like a map and compass to help guide us, but we can't just blindly follow them, right?
Exactly. We still need to pay attention, make our own judgments based on what we see.
So what do you think, what does this all mean for the future of DeFi? If these platforms are successful in making these tools, more and more accessible, Will that change how we approach research, how we make decisions in this space?
That's a great question. It's hard to say for sure, right? It's a constantly evolving landscape. I think we'll definitely see some people lean more heavily on these algorithmic assessments, especially newcomers, maybe those who are a little less comfortable getting into the weeds.
Right.
But I think there will always be those who value doing that deep research, who want to understand the intricacies for themselves.
Yeah, it's like with any new technology, right?
Right.
You have the early adopters, the tech-savvy folks who want to tinker under the hood, and then you have those who just want things to work, you know?
Yeah, precisely. And the key is making sure that everyone has the resources and the knowledge to make good choices, no matter where they fall on that spectrum.
Totally. And that's where, education comes in, right? Having these open conversations.
Absolutely. Platforms like STON.Phi have a responsibility to really educate their users, help them understand both the opportunities and the risks involved, encourage them to look beyond just those surface level assessments.
It's about empowerment, right? Not just simplification.
Exactly. DeFi, when it's done right, it's about giving individuals the tools to participate in this more open, equitable financial system.
Right.
And as the space keeps growing, I think the platforms that really prioritize education, that put the power in the hands of individuals to make those informed decisions, those are the ones that will have a lasting impact.
Well said. I'm excited to see the future holds, that's for sure. We've learned so much in this deep dive into STON.Phi, not only about the platform itself, but also about, the bigger trends shaping the world of DeFi.
It's a fascinating time to be involved in this space, that's for sure. And we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
Definitely.
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep researching, and, ultimately form your own conclusions about these really important questions. The role of algorithms, how we assess risk, what individual agency really means in this evolving world of DeFi.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as always, a friendly reminder that this is not financial advice.
Right, of course.
Just our attempt to break down a really fascinating corner of the DeFi world.
Exactly.
So stay curious, keep learning, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.